Okay, so I want to go over the Mishnah, and then re-ask the questions, and then give what I think is a beautiful explanation of the Mishnah. Okay, so the Mishnah says that Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema Omer, Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema says that heavy oz kenomer, that a person has to be brazen like a leopard, kal kanesher, light like an eagle, rotz katzvi, swift like a deer, and gibor ka'ari, and mighty like a lion. La'asos ritzon avicha shebashamayim, in order to be able to do the will of God in heaven. Hu hayomer, he also used to say, Oz panim legehenim, that a person who is a brazen person is going to go to Gehenna. He's going to go to hell. He's going to go, his life is going to dissolve. Uboshes panim, but a person who has shamefacedness, so then that person is going to Gan Eden. Yehi ratzon milfanecha Hashem Elokeinu, may be your will, God, shetivne ircha b'mehera v'yameinu v'sein chokenu b'sarasecha, that it should be your will that you should build your city quickly in our days, and that you should give us a portion in your Torah. So the questions in the Mishnah are really obvious. The first problem is, who is this Yehuda ben Tema, and why did he say this Mishnah? The second is that what's with the Zusho, right? And that it's all about animals. You want to tell me to be a good person, which is what Pirkei Avos is doing, right? It's talking to me about how to be a good person. So then talk to me about how to be a good person. I don't need to be talked to like a 5-year-old with given metaphors that, I should be like a cat, and I should be like a dog, and I should be like why do I need all the metaphors of animals? And if you're going to give me animals, there are other animals that you could use as metaphors, and that the Chazal, that our rabbis use as metaphors. So why are these the 4 metaphors that were given? That's the first part of the Mishnah. Then the second part of the Mishnah, which says that that a person who is in the beginning, you tell me that a person should be bold like a leopard, and then you tell me that if you're bold, if you have Avos, then you go into hell. So there's an inherent contradiction in the Mishnah between the first half and the second half. And then the third part of the Mishnah is a prayer for the rebuilding of the temple. Why should we have a prayer for the rebuilding of the temple here in this Mishnah? This doesn't seem to be the end of Pirkei Avos. It doesn't seem to be any kind of conclusion of any kind of section. So then why should there be a prayer? We spoke about the concept of Toteism, which is a kind of worship of animals, and that you feel like related to that animal, and you receive all of the juice of that animal, all of the energy of that animal, and that becomes your God. And that's not the way we relate to animals, and that's certainly not the way we're looking at this Mishnah, that these animals are the 4 animals that we need to connect to be able to cull their energy. But I think that the message of the first part of the Mishnah is that we have an obligation to learn from the physical world around us, and that in the animal kingdom, there are so many things that we can learn from animals to our own behavior. And we constantly need to learn from these things. We're going to learn this later in a Mishnah in the next chapter, that we live our lives looking at examples. It's incredible in Judaism and in Torah that we put so much importance on examples, on the kind of example we are to other people, and the kind of things that we learn from other people. And it's not only people that we learn things from. That's the reason why the whole book of Bereshis is there. The whole book of Bereshis is there because when the Torah tells us in this week's Pasha, love your neighbor as yourself, you don't even have a context to put that in. What does it mean, love your neighbor as yourself? As opposed to just be a nice guy. But love your neighbor as yourself, where do we even have any kind of picture in our mind? Oh, so we do, because we look at Abraham, we look at Isaac, we look at Jacob, we look at the brothers in their degradation, in their fault, and we see that they weren't loving their neighbor as themselves. So that we have an example, a paradigm, and that's what the book of Bereshis is all about. When God says that we have an obligation to be kind, how do you know what kindness is unless you can point to a picture of Abraham? When God says that you have to be bold and strong and convicted to the things you do, right? You have to have a conviction. Where do we see an example of that? We look at Yitzchak. When God says that we have to know, we have to be a measured person. There are times where we have to be this way, and there are times where we have to be that way. So then where do we know that unless we can point to Jacob? When we talk about leadership, And we talk about being a strong person. How do we know anything like that if we didn't have a picture of Moses? And that's why we're so emphatic about the pictures that we have, and that we make them so important to ourselves, because we understand that that's the way we learn. We learn and we grow by looking at examples, not just about words and commandments, but that there has to be examples in our lives. What's amazing is that our examples are not limited to human beings. Our examples of behavior come also from the animal kingdom. When we want to learn about modesty, we look at certain animals. When we want to learn about industry, we look at certain animals. We want to learn about ferocity, we look at certain animals. King Solomon, in his book of Proverbs in Mishnah, talks very much about animals. There is a thing called Perek Shira. Perek Shira, which is a dispute as to exactly who the author of it is, but it's like Psalms in the sense that it is that it is a song that the world sings, and every verse in it is, or two verses is an animal, another animal in the kingdom, or another part of the universe that sings a song to God, and it quotes a verse and it attaches it to that. And when you learn that, you understand the nature of certain animals and what they have to teach us. We don't only look at the animal kingdom; we actually look at we look at nature. We learn, as a Jewish nation, we learn what Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot is from the agriculture of those three times. When Pesach is the time of the harvest of the growing, and Shavuos is the time of the harvest, and Sukkot is the time of the ingathering. Those are completely connected to the history and also to the very essence of who we are as a nation of gods. We learn not only from the history, but we learn also from the agriculture. We look at trees, and in Tu B'Shvat we talk a lot about the concept of trees and what trees have to teach us, of the idea that we're rooted in the ground and that our roots have to be strong, otherwise we'll be blown over, that we have to be striving upwards, like a tree strives upwards. We learn from the crookedness of the vine. There's every single tree, every single thing in nature has something to teach us incredible lessons for our lives. We understand that even when you look at the animals, and just look at the shape of an animal's on all fours, and really, where's its head? Its head is facing downwards. And look at a human being. A human being is on twos, and his head is facing upwards, because that's the difference between an animal and a human being. An animal is rooted to the ground, is rooted to chomer, to material, and the main example of that is a chamor, is a donkey, whose name, it means chomer, it means material, the material world, because he's just a paradigm, an example of all animals that are rooted to the ground. They're not rooted in a spiritual sense, they're rooted in a physical sense to the ground. We, though we stand on the ground, our roots are in the heaven, and therefore we look up towards our roots, and that's why we face upwards. There's metaphors in every single part of creation. Think about it like this, and I've mentioned this before, that we know that when God created us with the body that he created us in, he created us in that body for a very specific reason. When it's really very interesting that when science fiction writers write about life on other planets, and they talk about meeting a Martian, so a Martian is a distorted human being. Knows their reality is they know the human being reality. So what they do is that they make the Martians in a distorted sense. Instead of giving them eyes, they give them antlers. They give them sonars and all kinds of things. But it's really based off of the model of a human being, and their life is an extraterrestrial life of human beings. The concept of we being humans being rooted at home, and E.T., right? All he wanted was go home, right? Wie kommt a terrestrial, an extraterrestrial human being to wanting to go home? Because we want to go home. So it's all based off of who we are. It's fascinating. But the truth is that if we look at all of this, and we look at every single metaphor in the world, we have a lot to learn about ourselves, and that ultimately is the reason why we spend so much time really learning from the animal world, learning from the physical world, learning from the world around us. Also, I was mentioning that God created us in a certain way. So he created us with ears, he created us with a nose, he created us with eyes. Now he didn't have to. The science fiction writers taught us that we didn't need ears. We could have heard in other ways. We didn't need a mouth. We could have accomplished what we needed to accomplish in other ways. So why did he create us this way? He created us so that we could learn from the very shapes and organs that we were created in. There is much Torah about the way a woman is shaped, not just the physiology, but the way that her body is shaped, the way that a man's body is shaped. There is much about the physiology and much about the genitalia, much talk in the rabbinic writings of the understanding, not of the things themselves, but of what they represent and mean. Our ears are shaped the way they are so that we can understand the concept that God is an ozen shomas, is an ear that hears. It's shaped in a way of a funnel so that we can understand this concept of funneling information so that we can work on ourselves and not just let everything into our ears or let everything into our eyes, that we're created with eyelids so that we have an ability to be able to shut our eyes. We're created with little flaps over here so that we have the ability to be able to close our ears. With that example, with that metaphor, it's not like some cute little thing, but it gives us the ability to be able to visualize and to be able to make into something real all of these lessons. If we didn't have eyes that were able to see that the way that they saw, it would be difficult for us to grasp a concept that God is an ayin roa, is an eye that sees everything, and that has the capacity to be able to see things that are not even in front of him. He has the capacity to be able to see that. If we didn't have the system the way we did, with the sensitivities that we had, we wouldn't be able to understand these things. Everything in this world is created in a way that we can understand a lesson from it. And if that's the case, so then we have to look at the world, and we have to say, what message do you have to teach me? Pirkei Avos is teaching me how to live and exist in this world as a fine-tuned human being. There are, if we start to talk about fine-tuning, there are hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of little gaskets and valves inside of us that need to be fine-tuned, and that need to be tweaked, and need to be fixed. But the truth is, it's impossible. If we're going to make it such a vast and a wide thing, so then it's going to be very difficult for us to actually fine-tune ourselves and actually improve ourselves. So it has to be whittled down into categories and into places. And that's what our rabbis have done. And Yehuda ben Tema whittled it all down to 4 major areas that require our attention. And I pointed out last week that the name Tema is the indication. It is the makeup of those 4 areas that Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema says that we have to spend our time worrying about and identifying. In our relationship to Torah, our relationship to Yud, Yira, fear of God, connection to God, in our relationship to mitzvah, to following God's commandments, and to using all of the mitzvahs to be able to fine-tune us and to be able to recognize that this is what shapes a personality, and the aleph, ava, a sense of love of God, and a sense of love of other human beings, a sense of love of life. All things Torah can be placed into and made up of these 4 categories. These are the 4 areas around which our lives have to be centered. And that's what Yehuda ben Tema comes to us to use animal metaphors to tell us, open up your eyes and look at the world and be a gibor ka'ari, to be able to see God in everything, to be able to vanquish, to be able to get rid of the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination that wants us not to be able to see God in everything, but rather we need to be able to push that out with strength. I'm going to talk much more about this in a few minutes, but strength, like a lion, is something that you need to live in a world of hostility. And we live in a world that is hostile, and it's hostile to the values that we have. We know that from, and it's sometimes a hard thing to come to terms with, that we're living in a world that is hostile to our values. And when I say our values, not just nebulous Jewish values, I'm talking about in Torah values. And Torah values, that's not the way the world works. It's not what the world thinks. It's not the way the world sees it. There are just so many incredible examples of the way of the parts of us that are rooted in the world, of how we have visceral reactions to certain things Torah and certain things Jewish, because we're looking at them through secular eyes, through the world's eyes, and that is antithetical to the way Torah sees things. And in order for a person to be able to truly live with Torah values, they have to recognize that there is going to be a part of them that is going to be living antithetically to the value system of the world. And for that, we need Gibor Ka'ari. And then Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema tells us that Ratz Kitzvi, that we have to be able, if we want to develop a sense of yira, a sense of awe, a sense of connection to God, then we have to do it with speed. Because if we don't do it with speed, things will get in our way. Things by definition will get in, and not just because we're busy, but things will block us from getting to the place we need to get to. Ratz Katzvi, in order to be able to build a relationship with God, to run away from things that could hurt us, to run towards things that could elevate us, that becomes something that is intrinsic and necessary for us to be able to develop ourselves. Love. To develop love, we have to have a sense of kal kanesher. We have to have a sense of being light like an eagle. There has to be a sense that we have an ability. And I'll talk more about this concept of love coming from an eagle in a few minutes. But if we want to develop this sense of love, then we have to be able to get on top of things. We have to be able to fly over things. And again, I'll explain it more. And then we have to mold ourselves after a nesher. We have to mold ourselves after the eagle. And those are the things that the Mishnah is telling us, that we have to take all four of these things and we have to put them together, and that's the way ultimately we have to shape our lives. And that's
there wasn't. So what was the one with the leopard then, or did you connect one to the mitzvah? One is
Oz Kinamer is boldness. Is we said that was boldness to receive. Oz Kinamer, Kal Kanesher is love. Ratz Katzvi, running like the deer. Mm-hmm. Is the mem, is the mitzvah, running towards mitzvah, and the aleph is kal kanesher, is like the eagle, and that's the ava. The Torah is az kanamer, the yira is gibor kari, the mitzvah is ratz katzvi, and the aleph is the ava, is the kal kanesher. When the Talmud presents this idea of being, this is in the Mishnah here, but it's also presented in the Talmud, that we have to be bold like a lion, and we have to have that kind of bold like the leopard, and we have to have the strength of a lion in order to be able to hold on to who we are and to become the kind of people we want to become. You need a tremendous amount of strength to be able to keep moving yourself forward. When it presents that, it presents it in a very interesting context. The Talmud says, La'olam yaseh Shabbos chachol, that a person has to make his Shabbos into weekday. That means that it is better that you don't have all the beauty and the fanfare and the externals of Shabbos, rather than come onto other people. In other words, if you don't have enough money, let's say, to make a beautiful Shabbos, so better you should eat a tuna fish sandwich than to have to come onto other people in order to be able to live off of their charity and goodness, in order to be able to build a beautiful Shabbos, in order to be able to make, to make a comfortable, beautiful Shabbos with meat and with all the things you need to do. So it's just fascinating that it says, "Asay Shabbos chachol," that you should make your Shabbos into weekday. Now, weekday doesn't mean that you should desecrate Shabbos, but it just means that it should not. You don't worry about this, the external specialness of Shabbos, if it means that to get that you have to come on to other people. And the rabbis look at that and say, what is the Talmud really trying to teach us? And what the Talmud is really trying to teach us is it's teaching us a lesson of independence. And that means that a person has to be independent. And if you are not independent, if you are dependent on others, so then you're not really living your life, because you're not in control of yourself, you're not in control of who you are. And when you have dependency in one area, you will end up having dependency in all areas. And in that context, the Talmud tells us that that's what the lesson of the four animals are. The lesson of the four animals are that you have to, this is how you make yourself dependent. You have the strength of a lion, you have the speed of a deer, you have the swiftness of an eagle, you have the boldness of a leopard. Those are qualities that allow you to have independence. When a person has that sense of speed and of boldness, and a person has that sense of strength, and a person has that sense of the ability to fly over the world, to be able to rise above things. I rise above things because I won't let anything hold me down. When you have those four things, so then that's when you have an ability to be able to grow. And that's the message of the Mishnah, the overall riding message of the Mishnah. But now let's take a look at the individual things. The first thing that the Mishnah tells us that is critical and important for us to be able to develop and grow with is a sense of boldness, a sense of az kanamer. As a matter of fact, the Shulchan Aruch begins with that. The code of Jewish law, every halacha that we have starts with the rule that you cannot cower in front of other people. You can't give in to other people. You have to have that sense of strength, and don't let anybody knock you off your line. That's how the Shulchan Aruch begins. Because if you don't have that sense of single-minded focus, if you don't have that sense of azos, brazenness, but brazenness doesn't mean chutzpah. It doesn't mean being a chutzpahdik person, but it means being a tenacious person. And it means being a single-minded person, focused on one thing and one thing only: truth and living a life of truth. And no one is going to take that truth away from me. No one is going to take that truth. No one is going to push me off that truth. It's an amazing thing. I saw it, and I'm not going to elaborate on this, but during Corona, I saw this of people that had this midah, this characteristic of azos. It manifested itself in almost opposite ways, but it came from many people, not out of fear, but out of a commitment to truth. In this particular context, the truth was a little bit nebulous, and people had a little bit of a different way of seeing the truth, but people held on. There were people that held on tenaciously to what they believed in. And that independence, that sense of focus, this is what is truth. And therefore, I'm going to hold on to this no matter what comes my way. That's what it means to be an Oz Kanamer. An Oz Kanamer, and we know this in our lives, the only times we've ever really accomplished great things is when we are an Oz Kanamer. When we're focused totally on what we're doing, we recognize that this is the truth by which we live, and we're dedicated to that truth. You know, a lot of people are dedicated to the truth of things not bothering them too much. As long as these things don't bother me too much, life is good. That doesn't mean life is good. Life is good when I am focused and I am working towards a clear goal and not letting anything get in my way. You know, one of my favorite stories that I tell over very often, and it can be seen in many different different ways and manifestations, that the Bluzhever Rebbe was in the Holocaust, was in one of the concentration camps, and it's a whole long story, an elaborate story of how they were able to get. It wasn't even oil; it was shoe polish, and a little bit of threads from their already threadbare clothing, and they were able to make in a wooden shoe. They were able to make a menorah. They used the oil because they had the shoe polish had an oil base. They used the threads as a wick, and they were able to light a menorah. Now, lighting a menorah in the concentration camps was punishable by death, and it didn't make a difference. They gathered together with the Blushev Rebbe, and first night Hanukkah, they lit the menorah, and they made 3 brachas. The first bracha is the bracha on the mitzvah. Asher Kiddushanim b'Sasiv v'Tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Hanukkah. The second bracha is Sha'asa Nisim Lavaseinu, who has done miracles for our forefathers. And the third bracha was the bracha of Shechianu v'Kimanu v'Giyanu l'zman hazeh. Blessed is God who has kept us alive and sustained us to be able to reach this day. So one of the Chassidim said to the Blushev Rebbe, I don't understand. I can understand the first bracha, and I can understand the second bracha. But in this hellhole, you say Shechianu v'Kimanu v'Giyanu l'zman hazeh. The guy was perfectly right. In his estimation of truth, he was perfectly right. Blushev Rebbe looks at him and he says, look at where we are. We're in the depths of hell. It's punishable by death if we're caught lighting a menorah. And yet, look at how many Jews, all they wanted to do was to light the menorah and to say to God, our lights are still on. She'achiyanu v'kiyamanu v'higiyanu lazaman hazeh. How lucky we are to be able to see this time. It all depends on what your focus is. And it all depends on what you see as being the center and being truth. And when you have that single-minded kind of pursuit, the strength to be able to look at every adversary and to be able to look at every moment that is adversarial to what your truth is, to what the truth is, when you have that kind of strength, so then that's when you're going to be able to accomplish things. So the question you have to ask is, if Avos is so important, if being bold is so important, being single-mindedly pursuing things and having that kind of strength to push off everything that's trying to pull away at that, then why do we say later that an az panim leganim, that a person who has boldness and brazenness is going to hell? Because that kind of single-minded pursuit can be applied in negative ways also. That you can become a bully or an action, a person who is a stubborn person. You can become a haughty person. When you're constantly having to say to yourself that, this is right, this is the right way to be. I don't care that nobody else does this. I don't care that I have to live differently than everybody else. I don't care that everybody laughs at me. It doesn't matter. I'm not going to let them push me off of what I know is my goal and I know is my path. But that can turn into a sense of haughtiness and an inability to be able to respect other people and to be able to respect their opinions, because you're so busy fighting away all those opinions. And therefore, that's why the Mishnah has to warn us. Yes, it's important, but use it correctly. So you also have to ask the question that if it's so important that we have this, why do we have to look at a leopard to figure it out? Why weren't we born with Avos? We Jews don't have Avos. We have chutzpah, which is a little bit different, but we don't have a natural dose of Avos. It's something. It was hard for us. It's not something that's natural to us. How do I know that it's not something that's natural to us? Because the truth is, we're called Rachmanim, Baishanim, and Gomlei Chasadim. We are called merciful. These are the 3 signs of a Jew. We're merciful, we're bashful, we're modest, and we're kind. That's what we got going for us. Our strong suit is not this business. It doesn't mean that we didn't have it a little, but it's not our strong suit. Where did it come from? So you can't have a king if you don't have brazenness. You can't be a king if you don't have brazenness. You can't be a king of your own castle. You can't be a king in your life. You can't be a king over yourself unless you have a little bit of this brazenness, a little bit of this starkheit, right? This strongness to be able to say, no, you're not going to push me off my way. But it wasn't natural to us. So where did it come from? It came from Ruth, from Rus. She brought it into the Jewish people. And where did her brazenness come from? Where did that azus come from? It came from her family, because she was born from the daughters of Lot. Lot had two daughters. When Sodom was destroyed, Lot and his daughters ran away. They ran up to the top of a mountain. Lot's daughters thought that they were the only people left in the world, and therefore they had to repopulate the world with their dad as being their husband. And they got him drunk and they had relations with him. And the first one that became pregnant, she named her child Moav, from dad. And the second one that became pregnant was a little more modest in her choice of names. She called Ben Ami, the son of my nation. Ammon and Moab were two enemies of the Jewish people. And the reason that they were enemies of the Jewish people is because of the brazenness. The brazenness that they had, which was haughtiness, which was chutzpah. Walk around town with a kid who's named Gift from My Dad. You know, I always say the same joke. You're sitting in a play group, right? And all the moms are sitting with their kids, and one mom turns to the other and says, "Oh, what's your little child's name?" Jason. "Oh, that's such a sweet name." "What's your child's name?" Elizabeth. "Oh, that's such a nice name." "And what's your child's name?" "Gift from Dad." What do you think that is? It's Arkansas? I mean, how do you call your kid Gift from Dad unless you're a mechutzaf? Unless you could care less what people say about you, and you could care less what people think, and you could care less what this means about you, and what this means about your dad, and what are you saying about your father? That chutzpah, that brazenness, developed itself into a nation called Moab, who, when the Jewish people wanted to walk through and offered to pay for everything that they ate, as they just passed through the land on the way to Israel, they were told, if you step foot in here, you're going to die. They wouldn't help them one iota because of that chutzpah, because of that brazenness. But that brazenness needed to be inside the Jewish people. Because if we're going to have a king, if you're going to have a king, if you're going to be a king, if you're going to rule over your body and your life, then there needs to be that little bit of brazenness. But it needed to be grown in a petri dish outside of the Jewish people and then brought in. Rus, who was a princess of Moab, she then took that midah, that characteristic, brought it into the Jewish people when she converted and had a child, and she became what's called Ima Shel Malchus. She was the mother of royalty. And the reason why she was the mother of royalty is because she brought into the Jewish people this sense of azus, which without it, you cannot live. You cannot grow. You become a sheep, you flow, you ebb, you go with everybody, but you don't stand up to with your own independence. And that's why it was necessary for us to have azus, but to recognize the danger of that azus, of where it could bring us. Then Yehuda ben Tema turns to us and he says that we have to have kal kanesher. We have to be light like a nesher, like an eagle. So the pasuk in Hazinu talks about an eagle, the very end of the Torah. And it talks about how the eagle flies above the world. And it tells us a very interesting thing about where it puts its child. Normally you have an image of a bird holding onto its child below it. But the eagle knows that it's a hunted species. And the eagle can fly well above the world. And what the eagle is worried about is that from below they'll shoot arrows and they will kill its children. And therefore the eagle takes its child and puts it on its back, as if to put itself in between its child and the world so that it will protect the child. That's a beautiful, amazing thing. But how do you know that he's doing it for the child? How do you know that the eagle is not doing it just for himself? I don't want to lose my children, but not because I don't want them to be lost. I don't want to lose my children. Because the second half of the verse, really the first half of the verse tells us that he awakens his children, and our rabbis understand that he awakens his children very softly. And that he's worried about how his children get out of bed, so to speak, how they begin their day. And it's that you know how he cares about his children. It's not just that he's willing to jump in front of them and protect them, but that he worries about them and he's concerned about them. And that's the image. We have an image of an eagle on a quarter. We have an image of an eagle as a bold animal. An eagle is an animal of ultimate love, that with all of its strength and with all of the things that it can do in nature, but it has this kind of relationship to its children. There is another image of an eagle, and that is that an eagle can soar. An eagle has the ability to be able to soar above the world that it lives in. It's not really a medrash, but there is a parable that is said about the bird. When the bird was created, it turned to God and it said, God, I have a tine on you. You created me with thin, spindly legs, and every time a snake wants to come after me, I can't run fast enough to get away from the snake, and it bites me in the tuchus. Like, I can't stand this. I'm getting bitten all the time. The snake is my biggest enemy. You created me to die. So God says to the angel, okay, I'll take you to the bird. He says, I'll take care of you. And all of a sudden, bing, 2 wings sprout on the bird. And the bird, he says to the bird, you have no problems now. I gave you the ultimate protection. So the bird sees the snake and he, makes a raspberry at it and starts to taunt the snake, saying, oh, you won't get me now. And the snake starts to come after him. And the bird starts to run away. And as the bird is running away, he trips over his wings and he falls flat on his face and the snake bites him. Bird goes to God and says to God, I have a tine on you. What are you doing? You told me you were creating me wings. It made it worse. I got bitten earlier because I tripped over my wings. I fell down right away. You got me. So God said to him, silly bird, I created you wings. And if you learn how to use them, you can soar over the snake and he'll never be able to get near you. But if you don't learn how to use them, all they'll do is trip you up. And that's the metaphor, is the Torah. That God gave us the Torah. When we learn how to use it, we can soar above humanity. But when we don't learn how to use it, when we see it as a burden, then all it does is it trips us up and it prevents us from getting to the places that we need to get to. When we say that we have to be kal kanesher, that we have to be light like an eagle, that means we have to be able to have the ability to be able to fly over this world. The deer, there are many things to learn from the deer, but one of the most important things is speed. Speed. One of the things that are critical in life is a sense of alacrity, a sense of speed, a sense of enthusiasm and excitement to the things that we do. We say that a mitzvah bali yodcha, when a mitzvah comes to your hands, al tach mitzana, don't let it become chametz, don't let it become spoiled. You have to seize the moment. We have a lot of great ideas, but unless you have the energy to carry out those ideas, they die on the editing floor. They're just ideas. They're nothing more than that. To be able to actualize all of the potential that we have, to be able to take our dreams and turn them into reality, there has to be a sense of speed. Rabbi Salanter used to look at the world and learn many things, looked at a train. He said, the train is amazing. He says, a train, 20 cars. Only one of those cars has any energy, and that's the engine. And yet an engine with energy is able to pull 20 cars behind it. Said Rabbi Salanter, can you imagine a person with energy, of what they can pull behind them, of what they can be able to accomplish and do? And that's the third thing that we need to learn from a deer. We need to look at it and see how it runs, the kind of speed that it has. And then finally, the lion, the gibor ke'ari. How have we learned the word gibor in Pirkei Avos? Gibor doesn't mean this. Gibor means strength, means spiritual strength, the ability to be able to vanquish the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, self-control, the power over me. That's what real power is. Tenaciously defending the Torah, tenaciously living with the Torah, the strength to be able to dedicate the time and the energy and to be driven by doing the will of Hashem. I went a little quickly through this, but I want to get to the final point. That's what Yehuda ben Tema is teaching us. These four qualities, tenacity, strength, speed, these are the qualities that are necessary to become great, to pull out all the potential that lives in us. But as we said, it's dangerous. Because if you're fighting the world all the time, if you're going against everybody all the time, it has a detrimental effect on a person. Avram Avinu, standing strong, standing on one side of the world with the rest of the world on the other side, that was like amazing that he had the strength to do that. But at the end of the day, it took a toll on him. In his children, in his entire life, there was no ability to be able to accept authority. There was no sense of brotherhood that existed because he had to work so hard against his brother. He had to work so hard against things that were close to him, against his father. He had to stand apart from the rest of the world. And that's why we had to go down to Egypt to learn how to undo all of that stuff. It has a negative effect on us. But recognize that without this, we would never be here anymore. The Jews wouldn't be around. The reason why we're around is because we're tenacious. The reason why the Holocaust didn't destroy us is because we have those qualities of the deer and of the lion and of the leopard and of the eagle. And if we didn't have them, we would have assimilated and been obliterated long ago. But how long can you live like this? How long can you be bold like a leopard? How long can you be strong like a lion, roaring at everything? How long can you be screaming, anti-Semites, anti-Semites? How long can you be doing this, standing apart from the rest of the world? And that's why Yehuda ben Tema says, Yiratzim lefanecha Hashem Elokeinu shetibane ircha b'meir v'yameinu. Build the temple quickly, God. Get us out of here. Put us in a situation where we're comfortable, where we don't have to be fighting everything, where we don't have to be living a constant battle. And that's why right at this moment, he puts in the prayer for the rebuilding of the temple. Because he recognizes that it's so beautiful that we have the strength to live this way. But you can't do this forever. It's got to end soon. Otherwise, it will actually consume us and destroy us. And that's why here, in the oddest of places, he put that prayer for the rebuilding of the temple. Okay. Those are my thoughts. Chew them over. If you have any questions, you can always email me or bring them up next Monday night. Everybody should have a beautiful, wonderful, amazing night and beautiful days ahead of you.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Always awesome to see everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you. I was going to get to that.
Okay, I'm just going to get my Gemara in the other room. I'll be back in 1 second. Okay, let me shut this.